Chapter 1. Introduction to Habakkuk. The story of Habakkuk begins with a man who had many questions for God. Habakkuk was a prophet, but unlike many other prophets, he did not speak directly to the people at first. Instead, he spoke to God. He was troubled by what he saw around him. The land of Judah was full of sin. People were treating each other badly. There was violence, dishonesty, and oppression. The rich took advantage of the poor. The leaders did not follow God's laws. Habakkuk saw all of this and wondered why God was allowing it to happen. Habakkuk lived during a time of great trouble. The kingdom of Judah had turned away from God. Many of the kings and rulers did not obey God's commandments. They worshipped idols and followed false gods. The people had become corrupt, and injustice was everywhere. The wicked seemed to be winning, and the righteous were suffering. This troubled Habakkuk deeply. He wanted to understand why God was not stopping the evil. He wanted to know why God was allowing bad people to succeed while good people struggled. The Bible does not tell us much about Habakkuk's personal life. We do not know his family or where he was born, but we do know that he was a man of faith. He believed in God, and he wanted to see justice in the land. He knew that God was powerful, and he trusted that God would do what was right. But he struggled to understand why things were happening the way they were. The book of Habakkuk begins with his first complaint to God. He cried out, saying, "O Lord, how long shall I cry, and thou wilt not hear? Even cry out unto thee of violence, and thou wilt not save." Habakkuk 1 verse 2. He was frustrated because it seemed like God was not answering his prayers. He saw evil all around him and felt that God was not doing anything about it. He asked, "Why dost thou shew me iniquity, and cause me to behold grievance? For spoiling and violence are before me, and there are that raise up strife and contention." Habakkuk 1 verse 3. Habakkuk wanted to understand God's ways. He wanted to know why the law was not being followed. He said, "Therefore the law is slacked, and judgment doth never go forth. For the wicked doth compass about the righteous. Therefore wrong judgment proceedeth." Habakkuk 1 verse 4. He felt like justice was gone. He saw wicked people getting away with their sins, while those who tried to do right were suffering. It seemed unfair to him. This was a bold thing to do. Not many people spoke to God in this way. But Habakkuk was honest with God. He did not hide his feelings. He did not pretend that everything was fine. He brought his concerns before the Lord because he knew that only God could answer him. God did not rebuke Habakkuk for asking these questions. Instead, he responded. God had a plan, but his plan was not what Habakkuk expected. God was going to use the Babylonians, also called the Chaldeans, to punish Judah. The Babylonians were a fierce and powerful nation. They were strong, cruel, and did not fear God. They would come and bring destruction to Judah. Habakkuk had asked God why he was allowing evil to continue. Now, God was telling him that he was going to deal with the evil. But this answer brought more questions. Habakkuk did not understand why God would use a wicked nation to punish his people. The Babylonians were even worse than the people of Judah. Why would God allow such an evil nation to rise? The book of Habakkuk is different from many other books of prophecy. Most prophets were sent to deliver messages to the people. But Habakkuk's message is a conversation between him and God. It is a book of deep questions and strong faith. It shows that even those who trust in God can have doubts. It shows that it is okay to ask God questions. God is not afraid of our questions. He listens and responds. One of the most important lessons from Habakkuk is that we must trust in God's plan, even when we do not understand it. Habakkuk did not see the whole picture, but God did. God had a plan that was greater than Habakkuk could imagine. Sometimes life does not seem fair. Sometimes it looks like evil is winning. But God is always in control. His justice will come in his perfect time. The story of Habakkuk also teaches us about patience. Habakkuk wanted answers right away, but God's timing is not like ours. God sees everything from the beginning to the end. He knows what is best, even when we do not. The Bible tells us in Isaiah 55 verses 8 to 9, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, saith the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Another important lesson from Habakkuk is that faith means trusting God, even in difficult times. When things are hard, we must hold on to God. Even when we do not see the answers we want, we must remember that God is good. We must remember that He is just. We must remember that He loves His people and that His plans are always right. Habakkuk's journey is one that many people can relate to. There are times in life when we feel like Habakkuk. We see injustice. We see suffering. We see evil. And we wonder why God allows it. We wonder why He does not stop it right away. But Habakkuk's story reminds us that God's ways are higher than ours. It reminds us that God is working, even when we do not see it. It reminds us to wait on Him and to trust in His perfect plan. As the book continues, we see how Habakkuk moves from questioning to trusting. He begins with doubt, but he ends with faith. He learns that even when life is hard, even when everything seems to be falling apart, God is still worthy of praise. This is one of the greatest messages of the book. The story of Habakkuk is a powerful lesson for all of us. It shows us that we can be honest with God. We can bring our fears, our doubts, and our struggles to Him. He will not turn us away. He will listen, and in His perfect time, He will answer. Habakkuk's journey reminds us that God's justice will always come. His truth will always stand, and His people will always be in His care. As we go deeper into Habakkuk's story, we will see how he wrestles with God's answers and how he comes to a place of trust and faith. His journey is one that teaches us to believe, to wait, and to trust in the Lord with all our hearts. Habakkuk's questions are questions that many people still ask today, and God's answers are still the same. He is in control, He is just, and He will always do what is right. Chapter 2. Habakkuk's first complaint. Habakkuk looked at the world around him, and his heart was troubled. Everywhere he turned, he saw people doing evil. There was violence in the streets. The poor were suffering while the rich became more powerful. People lied, cheated, and stole. The leaders of the land did not care about justice. The law was ignored, and the wicked seemed to be winning. It felt like no one was doing what was right anymore. Habakkuk could not stay silent. He cried out to God, asking for help. He said, "O Lord, how long shall I cry, and Thou wilt not hear? Even cry out unto Thee of violence, and Thou wilt not save." Habakkuk 1 verse 2. He had been praying for a long time, but it seemed like God was not listening. He kept asking God to do something, but nothing changed. The wicked were still in control, and the innocent were suffering. Habakkuk asked God why he had to see so much evil. He said, "Why dost Thou shew me iniquity, and cause me to behold grievance? For spoiling and violence are before me, and there are that raise up strife and contention." Habakkuk 1 verse 3. Everywhere he looked, there was fighting and destruction. People argued and hurt each other. There was no peace in the land. It seemed like no one cared about what was right. The leaders were supposed to enforce the law, but they did not. Instead of protecting the innocent, they let the wicked go free. Habakkuk said, "Therefore the law is slacked, and judgment doth never go forth. For the wicked doth compass about the righteous. Therefore wrong judgment proceedeth." Habakkuk 1 verse 4. Justice was broken. The courts were corrupt. The wicked surrounded the righteous, making it impossible for them to find fairness. Those who tried to do right were being silenced. Habakkuk was confused. He believed that God was just. He knew that God hated evil. But if that was true, why was God allowing this to happen? Why was He letting the wicked continue in their ways? Why was He not stepping in to fix things? These are bold questions. Many people might have been afraid to speak to God this way. But Habakkuk did not hold back. He was not complaining just to complain. He was asking because he truly wanted to understand. He wanted to see God's justice in action. He wanted to know why God was silent when His people were suffering. Habakkuk's complaint is something that many people can relate to. There are times when we see things that seem unfair. We hear about crime, war, and suffering. We see bad people succeed while good people struggle. We wonder why God does not stop it. We wonder why He does not fix things right away. Habakkuk was not the first person in the Bible to ask these kinds of questions. In Psalm 13, verse 1, David cried out, "How long wilt thou forget me, O Lord? Forever? How long wilt thou hide thy face from me?" David also struggled with waiting for God's justice. He felt like God was far away. Job, too, had questions for God when he suffered. He could not understand why God was allowing him to go through so much pain. The Bible shows us that it is okay to ask God questions. It is okay to tell him when we are struggling. God does not get angry when we come to him with our honest thoughts. He already knows what is in our hearts. He wants us to bring our worries to him. Habakkuk was not losing faith. He was not turning away from God. He was seeking answers. He believed that God was the only one who could fix the problems in Judah. That is why he prayed. He did not try to solve things on his own. He did not ignore the problem. He went straight to God and asked for help. When we face difficult situations, we can learn from Habakkuk's example. Instead of keeping our worries inside, we should bring them to God. Even when we do not understand what is happening, we should trust that he is listening. He may not answer right away, but he always hears us. God's timing is different from ours. Sometimes we want answers immediately. We want problems to be solved right away. But God sees the whole picture. He knows what is best. He answers prayers in his perfect time. Habakkuk's first complaint teaches us about patience. He had to wait for God's response. Even though he was troubled, he did not stop praying. He did not give up on God. He kept asking. He kept seeking. He kept trusting that God would answer. Many people today feel like Habakkuk. They look at the world and see so much wrong. They wonder why God allows suffering. They wonder why evil people seem to succeed. But Habakkuk's story reminds us that God is not blind to what is happening. He sees it all. He knows every injustice. He knows every tear that has been cried. He knows every wrong that has been done. Even when it seems like God is silent, he is working. Even when it seems like evil is winning, God's justice will come. The Bible says in Ecclesiastes 8, verse 11, "Because sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, therefore the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil." Just because God does not punish evil right away does not mean he will not punish it at all. God's timing is perfect. He knows when to act. He knows when to bring judgment. He knows when to show mercy. Our job is to trust him, even when we do not understand. Habakkuk's complaint also shows us that we should care about justice. He was not only concerned about himself, he was concerned about his people. He wanted to see righteousness in the land. He wanted to see God's laws followed. He wanted to see good people protected and evil people punished. As believers, we should also desire justice. We should stand against sin. We should speak up when we see things that are wrong. But most importantly, we should pray. We should bring our concerns to God, just like Habakkuk did. Habakkuk was honest with God, and God listened. He did not ignore Habakkuk's cry. He had a plan. He was about to answer in a way that Habakkuk did not expect. Sometimes, God's answers are different from what we want. Sometimes he works in ways we do not understand. But we must remember that he is always in control. He is always good, and he always does what is right. Habakkuk's first complaint is a reminder that we can trust God, even in difficult times. It is a reminder that we can talk to him about our worries. It is a reminder that his justice will come at the right time. The story of Habakkuk is not just about a prophet from long ago. It is a story that speaks to us today. It is a story that teaches us to hold on to faith, to seek God in prayer, and to trust that he will always do what is right. Chapter 3, God's first response. Habakkuk had cried out to God. He had asked why evil was winning. He had asked why the wicked were allowed to oppress the righteous. He wanted to know why God was silent. But God was not silent. He heard Habakkuk's prayer, and he answered. God said, "Behold ye among the heathen, and regard, and wonder marvelously. For I will work a work in your days, which ye will not believe, though it be told you." Habakkuk 1 verse 5. God was telling Habakkuk to look and see. Something was about to happen, something so great that people would not believe it, even if they were told in advance. God had a plan. He was going to bring judgment. He was going to punish the wickedness in Judah. But his answer was not what Habakkuk expected. God said, "For lo, I raise up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation, which shall march through the breadth of the land, to possess the dwelling places that are not theirs. Habakkuk 1 verse 6. The Chaldeans, also known as the Babylonians, were a powerful and ruthless people. They did not fear God. They were cruel and strong. They took whatever they wanted, destroying nations in their path. And now, God was saying that he was going to use them to bring judgment upon Judah. God described them, saying, "They are terrible and dreadful. Their judgment and their dignity shall proceed of themselves." Habakkuk 1 verse 7. They were not ruled by justice or kindness. They did whatever they pleased. They followed their own ways, not God's ways. They were feared by all the nations around them. Their army was fast and fierce. Their horses also are swifter than the leopards, and are more fierce than the evening wolves. And their horsemen shall spread themselves, and their horsemen shall come from far. They shall fly as the eagle that hasteth to eat. Habakkuk 1 verse 8. They moved quickly, striking their enemies before they had time to react. They were powerful like a hungry eagle swooping down to grab its prey. No one could stand against them. They came for violence. They did not come to bring peace. God said, "They shall come all for violence. Their faces shall sup up as the east wind, and they shall gather the captivity as the sand." Habakkuk 1 verse 9. They would take captives without number. They would destroy cities and take the people away as prisoners. They did not fear any king or ruler. They did not respect any law. They would laugh at the kings of the nations. They shall scoff at the kings, and the princes shall be a scorn unto them. They shall deride every stronghold, for they shall heap dust and take it. Habakkuk 1 verse 10. No fortress could stand against them. No army was strong enough to defeat them. They crushed everything in their path, but their strength did not come from God. They trusted in their own power. They worshipped their own might. God said, "Then shall his mind change, and he shall pass over and offend, imputing this his power unto his God." Habakkuk 1 verse 11. They did not give credit to the Lord. They did not thank him for their victories. Instead, they worshipped their weapons, their armies, and their own strength. This was God's answer to Habakkuk. He was not ignoring the evil in Judah. He saw what was happening. He saw the sin. He saw the injustice. And he was going to act. But his way of bringing justice was not what Habakkuk had expected. He was going to use a nation even more wicked than Judah to bring judgment. This was a shocking answer. Habakkuk had wanted justice, but he had not expected this. The Babylonians were cruel and merciless. They destroyed everything in their path. And now, God was saying that he would let them rise up and conquer Judah. This teaches us something important about God. His ways are not our ways. Sometimes his answers are not what we expect. Sometimes he works in ways that seem strange to us. But he always has a plan. He always knows what he is doing. God's response also reminds us that he is in control of all nations. He raises up kings and brings them down. He allows nations to rise, and he allows them to fall. The Babylonians thought they were strong because of their own power, but it was God who allowed them to grow. It was God who gave them the ability to conquer. He was using them for his purpose, even though they did not know it. This shows us that God can use anything for his will. Even wicked people, even powerful nations that do not follow him, are under his control. He can use them to bring about his justice. He can use them to accomplish his plan. Sometimes we may not understand why God allows certain things to happen. We may not understand why he lets the wicked succeed for a time. But we must remember that he sees the whole picture. He knows the beginning and the end, and his justice will always come. The Bible tells us in Isaiah 55 verses 8 to 9, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, saith the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." We may not always understand God's ways, but we can trust that he is good. We can trust that he knows what he is doing. Habakkuk had asked why God was not acting, and God answered. He was acting. He was bringing judgment. But his answer was not what Habakkuk had expected. God's justice would come, but it would come in a way that was hard to understand. This is a lesson for us today. Sometimes we ask God for help, but his answer is not what we thought it would be. Sometimes he works in ways we do not like or do not expect. But we must trust him. We must believe that his ways are best. God's response also teaches us that he is patient. He does not always bring judgment right away. He gives people time to repent. He gives them chances to turn back to him. But if they continue in their sin, his judgment will come. The Babylonians thought they were in control, but they were not. God was using them for a time, but he would also judge them. Their wickedness would not last forever. Their power would not last forever. God's justice would come for them, just as it was coming for Judah. This reminds us that no nation, no king, no ruler is above God. He is the one who rules over all. He is the one who decides the fate of nations. The wicked may rise for a time, but they will never last forever. God's justice will always come. Habakkuk had asked, "How long, O Lord? How long will evil continue?" God's answer was clear. He was bringing judgment. He was not ignoring the sin of Judah. He was not blind to what was happening. He saw it all, and he was about to act. This is a reminder for us today. When we see evil in the world, when we wonder why God does not act, we must remember that he is in control. His justice will come in his perfect time. We may not always understand his ways, but we can trust that he is good. Habakkuk had asked for answers, and God had given them. But these answers were not easy to accept. The Babylonians were fierce and cruel. Their rise to power would bring great suffering, and Habakkuk was left with even more questions. As we continue through the book of Habakkuk, we will see how he responds to God's answer. He will struggle with it. He will ask more questions. But through it all, the story of Habakkuk is not just about a prophet from long ago. It is a story that speaks to us today. It teaches us to trust in God, even when we do not understand. It teaches us that his justice will come, even when it seems delayed. And it teaches us that he is always in control, working out his perfect plan for the world. Chapter 4, Habakkuk's second complaint. Habakkuk had asked God why he was allowing evil to continue in Judah. God had answered, but his response was not what Habakkuk expected. God said he was raising up the Babylonians to bring judgment on Judah. The Babylonians were fierce, cruel, and powerful. They would destroy cities, take captives, and show no mercy. They were even more wicked than the people of Judah. Habakkuk was shocked. He did not understand. He wanted justice, but this did not seem right. How could a holy and just God use such an evil nation to punish his own people? How could he allow the wicked Babylonians to grow in power? Judah had sinned, but the Babylonians were even worse. Would God let them go unpunished? Habakkuk cried out to God again. He said, "Art thou not from everlasting, O Lord my God, mine Holy One? We shall not die. O Lord, thou hast ordained them for judgment, and, O mighty God, thou hast established them for correction." Habakkuk 1 verse 12. Habakkuk was reminding himself of who God is. He knew that God is eternal. He knew that God is holy. He knew that God would not let evil go unpunished forever. He believed that Judah would not be completely destroyed because God had chosen them as his people. Habakkuk continued, saying, "Thou art of purer eyes than to behold evil, and canst not look on iniquity. Wherefore lookest thou upon them that deal treacherously, and holdest thy tongue when the wicked devoureth the man that is more righteous than he?" Habakkuk 1 verse 13. Habakkuk knew that God was pure. He knew that God hated sin. But if that was true, why was God allowing the Babylonians to succeed? Why was he letting them destroy people who were not as wicked as they were? It did not make sense to Habakkuk. Then Habakkuk used an image to describe what was happening. He said, "And makest men as the fishes of the sea, as the creeping things, that have no ruler over them?" Habakkuk 1 verse 14. He was saying that the people were helpless, like fish in the sea with no one to protect them. They had no power against the Babylonians. They were defenseless, and the enemy was coming to take them away. Habakkuk said, "They take up all of them with the angle. They catch them in their net and gather them in their drag. Therefore they rejoice and are glad." Habakkuk 1 verse 15. The Babylonians were like fishermen, pulling in their nets full of fish. They captured people easily, and they were happy about it. They did not care about those they destroyed. They only cared about their own power. Habakkuk continued, saying, "Therefore they sacrifice unto their net, and burn incense unto their drag, because by them their portion is fat, and their meat plenteous." Habakkuk 1 verse 16. The Babylonians did not thank God for their victories. Instead, they worshipped their own strength. They acted as if their power came from themselves. They gave honor to their weapons and their armies instead of to God. They were proud and full of themselves. Habakkuk asked, "Shall they therefore empty their net, and not spare continually to slay the nations?" Habakkuk 1 verse 17. He wanted to know if the Babylonians would keep winning forever. Would they keep taking over nations without being stopped? Would they continue to destroy without mercy? Would God let them go on like this forever? Habakkuk did not understand God's plan. He had asked for justice, but now things seemed even more unfair. He knew God was good, but what he was seeing did not make sense. He was struggling to trust God's way of doing things. But even though he had questions, he did not turn away from God. Instead, he brought his questions to God again. This is something we can learn from Habakkuk. When we do not understand what God is doing, we should not turn away from him. We should bring our questions to him. We should pray and ask for understanding. God wants us to seek him. He wants us to trust him, even when things do not make sense. There are times in life when things seem unfair. We see bad people succeed while good people suffer. We see evil growing while the innocent are hurt. We wonder why God allows it. We wonder when he will bring justice. But Habakkuk reminds us that it is okay to ask God questions. It is okay to struggle with what we see. Faith does not mean we never ask why. Faith means we bring our questions to God and trust him to answer in his time. Habakkuk did not run away from God. He did not stop believing. He kept praying. He kept waiting for an answer. After bringing his complaint to God, Habakkuk made a decision. He said, "I will stand upon my watch and set me upon the tower, and will watch to see what he will say unto me, and what I shall answer when I am reproved." Habakkuk 2 verse 1. Habakkuk was saying that he would wait for God's answer. He would not try to figure things out on his own. He would not rush ahead. He would wait for God to speak. This shows us the kind of faith Habakkuk had. Even though he was confused, he trusted that God would answer. He trusted that God had a plan. He was willing to wait and listen. Many times, we want answers right away. We want to understand everything immediately. But sometimes, God asks us to wait. He asks us to trust him, even when we do not see the full picture. Habakkuk stood watch like a guard on a tower, looking for God's response. He was ready to listen. He was ready to hear what God had to say. This is a lesson for us. When we have questions, we should pray. But after we pray, we should also wait for God's answer. We should trust that he will speak in his perfect time. Habakkuk's second complaint teaches us that it is okay to struggle with what we see. It teaches us that we can bring our confusion to God. It teaches us that we must trust in his justice, even when we do not understand his ways. God was not ignoring Habakkuk. He was not ignoring the evil in Judah or the wickedness of the Babylonians. He had a plan. He was in control, and soon he would answer again. Habakkuk's story is not just about the past. It speaks to us today. It reminds us that God is always at work, even when we do not understand. It reminds us to keep trusting, keep praying, and keep waiting for Chapter 5, God's second response. Habakkuk had cried out to God again. He had asked why God would use the wicked Babylonians to punish Judah. He did not understand how a holy God could allow such an evil nation to succeed. But even though he had questions, he chose to wait for God's answer. He said, "I will stand upon my watch and set me upon the tower, and will watch to see what he will say unto me, and what I shall answer when I am reproved." Habakkuk 2 verse 1. God answered Habakkuk again. This time his response was clear and firm. God told Habakkuk to write down his words so that others could read them. He said, "Write the vision and make it plain upon tables, that he may run that readeth it." Habakkuk 2 verse 2. God wanted this message to be known. He wanted people to understand what was coming. His judgment was certain, and no one would be able to escape it. God told Habakkuk that what he had planned would surely come to pass. He said, "For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it shall speak, and not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come, it will not tarry." Habakkuk 2 verse 3. God's justice would not come immediately, but it would come at the right time. It might seem like a delay, but it was not. God's timing is always perfect. Then God spoke a very important truth. He said, "Behold, his soul which is lifted up is not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith." Habakkuk 2 verse 4. The proud, like the Babylonians, would not last, but the righteous, those who trust in God, would live by faith. This was a promise for Habakkuk and for all who believe in God. Even when things seem unfair, even when the wicked seem to win, the just must live by faith. They must trust in God's plan. God then spoke about the Babylonians. He made it clear that they would not escape his judgment. They were strong now, but their power would not last forever. Their evil ways would bring destruction upon them. God pronounced 5 judgments, or woes, against them. Each woe showed why they would be punished. First, God spoke against their greed. He said, "Woe to him that increaseth that which is not his. How long? And to him that ladeth himself with thick clay." Habakkuk 2 verse 6. The Babylonians stole from other nations. They took what did not belong to them. They gathered wealth by violence and oppression. But God said their victims would rise up against them. One day, those they had stolen from would take back what was theirs. Second, God spoke against their dishonesty. He said, "Woe to him that coveteth an evil covetousness to his house, that he may set his nest on high, that he may be delivered from the power of evil." Habakkuk 2 verse 9. The Babylonians thought they could make themselves safe by building strong cities and gathering riches. They thought their wealth would protect them. But God said their own actions would bring their downfall. Third, God spoke against their violence. He said, "Woe to him that buildeth a town with blood, and stablisheth a city by iniquity." Habakkuk 2 verse 12. The Babylonians built their empire through war and bloodshed. They killed without mercy to gain power. But their success would not last. Their cities, built on sin, would one day be destroyed. God reminded Habakkuk of his greater plan. He said, "For the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea." Habakkuk 2 verse 14. The Babylonians thought they ruled the world, but God was in control. His glory would one day fill the whole earth. Fourth, God spoke against their cruelty. He said, "Woe unto him that giveth his neighbor drink, that puttiest thy bottle to him, and makest him drunken also, that thou mayest look on their nakedness." Habakkuk 2 verse 15. The Babylonians shamed and humiliated others. They abused people for their own pleasure. But God said that shame would come upon them instead. They would drink from the cup of his wrath. Fifth, God spoke against their idolatry. He said, "Woe unto him that saith to the wood, Awake, to the dumb stone, Arise, it shall teach. Behold, it is laid over with gold and silver, and there is no breath at all in the midst of it." Habakkuk 2 verse 19. The Babylonians worshipped idols made of wood and stone. They trusted in false gods that could not speak or act. But idols had no power. Only the Lord is God. Then God gave Habakkuk a powerful reminder. He said, "But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him." Habakkuk 2 verse 20. God was still in control. He was on his throne. No matter how powerful the Babylonians seemed, they were nothing before him. The whole earth was to stand in awe of his power. God's response was clear. The Babylonians were being used as an instrument of judgment, but their own sin would bring their downfall. They would not escape justice. Their pride, their greed, their violence, their cruelty, and their idolatry would all lead to their destruction. God's justice would come at the appointed time. This was the answer Habakkuk needed. He had questioned why God allowed the Babylonians to succeed, but now he saw the bigger picture. Their success was only for a time. Their power would not last. God's justice would come, and in the end, the whole earth would see his glory. This teaches us an important lesson. Evil may seem strong for a time, but it will never last. The wicked may rise, but they will always fall. God sees everything, and he will bring justice in his perfect time. God's words also remind us that the just shall live by faith. We may not always understand what God is doing, but we must trust him. We must believe that he is in control. Even when the world seems unfair, even when the wicked seem to win, we must live by faith. God's response to Habakkuk gives hope. It shows that God's justice is sure. It shows that his glory will one day fill the earth. It shows that those who trust in him will live by faith and see his victory in the end. Habakkuk had struggled with questions, but now he had his answer. God had spoken. The Babylonians would not win forever. Their judgment was coming. And through it all, God was still on his throne. This is a lesson for us today. No matter how dark the world seems, no matter how powerful evil appears, God is still in control. His justice will come. His glory will fill the earth. And those who trust in him will. Chapter 6, Habakkuk's Prayer and Praise. Habakkuk had heard God's answers. He had asked why evil seemed to go unpunished. God had told him that justice would come in his perfect time. The Babylonians, though powerful now, would not last. Their pride, greed, and violence would bring their own destruction. God was in control. The just would live by faith. Now, after hearing all that God had said, Habakkuk responded with a prayer. This prayer was not another complaint. It was not filled with questions. It was a prayer of worship. Habakkuk had moved from confusion to trust. He had gone from fear to faith. He no longer doubted God's plan. Instead, he praised God for who he is and what he would do. Habakkuk began his prayer by saying, "O Lord, I have heard thy speech and was afraid. O Lord, revive thy work in the midst of the years. In the midst of the years make known. In wrath remember mercy." Habakkuk 3 verse 2. Habakkuk had heard God's words, and he was in awe. He knew that judgment was coming. He knew that the Babylonians would bring destruction. But he also knew that God is merciful. He asked God to remember mercy even in the midst of his judgment. Then Habakkuk described the power of God. He spoke of how God had shown his might in the past. He remembered how God had saved his people before, and he trusted that God would do it again. He said, "God came from Teman, and the Holy One from Mount Paran. Selah, his glory covered the heavens, and the earth was full of his praise." Habakkuk 3 verse 3. Teman and Mount Paran were places where God had revealed his power in the past. His glory had been seen before, and it would be seen again. Habakkuk continued to describe God's greatness. He said, "And his brightness was as the light. He had horns coming out of his hand, and there was the hiding of his power." Habakkuk 3 verse 4. God's power was like shining light. It could not be hidden. He was greater than any army, greater than any kingdom, greater than any enemy. Habakkuk then spoke of God's power over nature. He said, "Before him went the pestilence, and burning coals went forth at his feet. He stood and measured the earth. He beheld and drove asunder the nations, and the everlasting mountains were scattered. The perpetual hills did bow. His ways are everlasting." Habakkuk 3 verses 5 to 6. When God moves, the earth trembles. Mountains, which seem so strong, are nothing before him. Nations rise and fall at his command. He is everlasting. Habakkuk remembered how God had saved his people before. He spoke of the times when God had rescued Israel, when he had led them through the wilderness, when he had fought for them. He said, "The sun and moon stood still in their habitation. At the light of thine arrows they went, and at the shining of thy glittering spear." Habakkuk 3 verse 11. This reminded him of when God made the sun stand still for Joshua. God had always been faithful. Then Habakkuk spoke of God's victory. He said, "Thou wentest forth for the salvation of thy people, even for salvation with thine anointed. Thou woundedst the head out of the house of the wicked by discovering the foundation unto the neck." Selah, Habakkuk 3 verse 13. God was not only a God of judgment. He was a God of salvation. He had saved his people before, and he would do it again. Habakkuk had begun his journey with fear. He had seen the violence in Judah and wondered why God allowed it. Then he had heard that the Babylonians were coming, and he had been even more troubled. But now, after hearing God's answers, he was at peace. He knew that God's plan was perfect. He knew that God was in control. Habakkuk admitted that he was still afraid of what was coming. He said, "When I heard, my belly trembled. My lips quivered at the voice. Rottenness entered into my bones, and I trembled in myself, that I might rest in the day of trouble. When he cometh up unto the people, he will invade them with his troops." Habakkuk 3 verse 16. He knew that difficult times were ahead. He knew that Judah would suffer. But he also knew that he could trust in God. Then Habakkuk said something powerful. He said, "Although the fig tree shall not blossom, neither shall fruit be in the vines, the labor of the olive shall fail, and the field shall yield no meat. The flock shall be cut off from the fold, and there shall be no herd in the stalls. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation." Habakkuk 3 verses 17 to 18. He was saying that even if everything went wrong, even if there was no food, even if there was nothing left, he would still trust in God. He would still rejoice in him. Habakkuk had learned to live by faith. He no longer needed to understand everything. He no longer needed to see justice right away. He had learned to trust God no matter what. He ended his prayer by saying, "The Lord God is my strength, and he will make my feet like hinds' feet, and he will make me to walk upon mine high places." Habakkuk 3 verse 19. God was his strength. No matter what happened, God would help him stand. Habakkuk's prayer teaches us an important lesson. There will be times when we do not understand what God is doing. There will be times when we are afraid. But in those times, we must remember who God is. He is powerful. He is faithful. He is just. He is our salvation. Faith does not mean we will always have easy lives. Faith means we trust God even when things are hard. Faith means we rejoice in God even when we do not see the answers we want. Faith means we know that God is in control no matter what happens. Habakkuk started with questions, but he ended with worship. He started with fear, but he ended with faith. He started by looking at the problems around him, but he ended by looking at God. This is what we must do. When life is difficult, when things do not make sense, we must look to God. We must remember his power, his faithfulness, and his salvation. And no matter what happens, we must rejoice in him. Chapter 7. The Message of Habakkuk. The book of Habakkuk is a message about faith, trust, and God's justice. It begins with a man full of questions. Habakkuk sees the wickedness around him, and he wonders why God allows it. He asks why evil people seem to win while the righteous suffer. But as the story unfolds, Habakkuk learns an important lesson. He learns that God's ways are higher than our ways. He learns that God's timing is perfect. He learns that no matter what happens, the just shall live by faith. At the start of the book, Habakkuk cries out to God. He sees violence and injustice in Judah. The people have turned away from God. They do evil without fear. The law is ignored, and the wicked are in control. He asks, "O Lord, how long shall I cry, and thou wilt not hear? Even cry out unto thee of violence, and thou wilt not save." Habakkuk 1 verse 2. He does not understand why God is silent. He wants God to act right away. God answers, but his answer surprises Habakkuk. He says that he is raising up the Babylonians, a powerful and cruel nation, to punish Judah. He says, "For lo, I raise up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation, which shall march through the breadth of the land, to possess the dwelling places that are not theirs." Habakkuk 1 verse 6. The Babylonians are strong, and they will conquer many nations. They are proud and ruthless. They worship their own strength. But for now, God is using them to bring judgment. Habakkuk is even more confused. He does not understand why God would use such an evil nation. He knows that Judah has sinned, but he does not think the Babylonians should be the ones to punish them. He asks, "Wherefore lookest thou upon them that deal treacherously, and holdest thy tongue when the wicked devoureth the man that is more righteous than he?" Habakkuk 1 verse 13. Habakkuk wonders how God can allow such a wicked nation to rise to power. But instead of doubting God, Habakkuk chooses to wait for his answer. He says, I will stand upon my watch, and set me upon the tower, and will watch to see what he will say unto me. Habakkuk 2 verse 1. He does not turn away from God. He does not stop believing. He waits, knowing that God will answer in his time. God speaks again. He tells Habakkuk to write his words down, because they are certain and will come to pass. He says, For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it shall speak, and not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come, it will not tarry. Habakkuk 2 verse 3. God's judgment will come, but at the right time. Even if it seems delayed, it is not. God's plan is never late. Then God gives the most important message in the book. He says, Behold, his soul which is lifted up is not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith. Habakkuk 2 verse 4. This is the heart of the message of Habakkuk. The proud will fall, but those who trust in God will live. The wicked may seem strong, but their power will not last. The righteous must walk by faith, even when they do not understand. God then gives 5 warnings or woes against the Babylonians. First, he condemns their greed. He says, Woe to him that increaseth that which is not his. Habakkuk 2 verse 6. They take what does not belong to them, but they will not keep it forever. Second, he condemns their dishonesty. He says, Woe to him that coveteth an evil covetousness to his house. Habakkuk 2 verse 9. They try to make themselves secure, but their own sin will destroy them. Third, he condemns their violence. He says, Woe to him that buildeth a town with blood, and stablisheth a city by iniquity. Habakkuk 2 verse 12. They kill and destroy to gain power, but their cities will fall. Fourth, he condemns their cruelty. He says, Woe unto him that giveth his neighbor drink, that puttiest thy bottle to him, and makest him drunken also. Habakkuk 2 verse 15. They shame others for their own gain, but they will be put to shame instead. Finally, he condemns their idolatry. He says, Woe unto him that saith to the wood, Awake. To the dumb stone, Arise. It shall teach. Habakkuk 2 verse 19. They trust in false gods, but idols cannot save them. Only the Lord is God. He ends by saying, But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. Habakkuk 2 verse 20. God is still on his throne. The whole earth must be silent before him. After hearing all of this, Habakkuk responds with a prayer. He no longer complains. He no longer asks why. Instead, he worships. He says, O Lord, I have heard thy speech, and was afraid. O Lord, revive thy work in the midst of the years. In the midst of the years make known. In wrath remember mercy. Habakkuk 3 verse 2. He knows that judgment is coming, but he also knows that God is merciful. Habakkuk remembers God's power. He speaks of how God has saved his people before, and he trusts that God will do it again. He says, The sun and moon stood still in their habitation. At the light of thine arrows they went. Habakkuk 3 verse 11. He remembers how God has fought for his people in the past. Even though Habakkuk is still afraid, he chooses to trust. He says, When I heard, my belly trembled, my lips quivered at the voice. Habakkuk 3 verse 16. He knows that trouble is coming, but he also knows that God is in control. Then he speaks some of the most powerful words in the Bible. He says, Although the fig tree shall not blossom, neither shall fruit be in the vines, the labor of the olive shall fail, and the field shall yield no meat. The flock shall be cut off from the fold, and there shall be no herd in the stalls. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. Habakkuk 3 verses 17 to 18. Habakkuk has learned to live by faith. Even if everything goes wrong, he will still trust in God. Even if there is no food, no safety, no comfort, he will still rejoice in the Lord. His faith is not based on his circumstances. His faith is based on God. He ends his prayer with these words, The Lord God is my strength, and he will make my feet like hinds' feet, and he will make me to walk upon mine high places. Habakkuk 3 verse 19. God is his strength. God will help him stand. The message of Habakkuk is clear. The world is full of evil, but God is still in control. The wicked may rise, but they will always fall. The righteous must live by faith. Even when we do not understand, even when we are afraid, we must trust in God. This message is still true today. There is still evil in the world. There are still times when we do not understand what God is doing. But just like Habakkuk, we must live by faith. We must trust that God's plan is perfect. We must rejoice in Him, no matter what happens. Because in the end, God's justice will come. His glory will fill the earth, and those who trust in Him. If you have enjoyed learning about this and want to learn more about God's Word, check out our other videos here.